We'll call the meeting to order. Note this meeting is being televised, streamed, or recorded by Bourne TV. If anyone in the audience is recording or videotaping, they need to acknowledge such at this time. Looks like none. The use of flash photography during Finance Committee meetings is prohibited. If anyone from the public wishes to access the meeting, they can do so by calling the following conference line, 1-929-205-6099. The Zoom meeting ID 870-4430-5257. Password FINCOM, FINCOM, all caps. The Zoom chat will not be monitored. Participants who wish to speak must raise the hand icon until the chair asks them to unmute. All items within the meeting agenda are subject to deliberation and votes. Okay, there's no one who's absent. So the first item, the next item, discussion with MJ Mastrangelo. So some members had questions, and I didn't really have the background to be confident answering, and someone suggested MJ might want to talk to us, and mostly in their capacity as a former chairperson here and a person who's very experienced in town and municipal finances. So thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me. So I'm just going to say I am here just for myself. I am not representing the select board. I'm just here as putting on my old finance committee hat, and that I did for a long time before I went on the select board. So you can just start. I mean, you had questions, just feel free to ask me questions. If you want me to talk, I will, but I think just starting with questions would be good. So does anybody have anything they want to start with?
Anyone, Priscilla?
Okay, so as a novice, just trying to see the budget through your folks' eyes, and in particular, usually say if I'm going to assess a facility, I'll figure out what things must be done, what things would be nice to have done, and what's icing on the cake. And that kind of came out in the capital budget with the priorities once I settled down and looked at it. But I guess I kind of want to hear from your point of view, how do you approach these budgets, number one? Is there anything that absolutely doesn't have to be done if we needed to cut back on these budgets? Thank you for the 5-year projection, because that made a lot of sense. But it just, I compared it to Worcester's. I took a look at Worcester's packet for their budget, and they're roughly, in terms of population for population, and however, landmass to landmass, and it's hard to make sense of it. I just fear that the expenditures are going to drive a lot of wonderful people like myself out, because taxes will be super high, and I just have concerns about that. I want to try to see it through you folks' eyes.
Okay. So I can give you some historic perspective, and I think Marlene does a good job in the town administrators, overview about saying these are her budget assumptions. She talks about the things that she's added. She talks about the things that she hasn't added. But so it seems a long time ago, but back in 2015, we had gone to the town for an operational override for the budget, and it lost by a very narrow margin. But as a result, we told people, if this override doesn't pass, we're going to have to cut the budget. And so that was in the fall of 2015, I think. So immediately at town meeting, we cut about $1.6 or $1.7 million from the FY16 budget. When the Finance Committee had talked at that annual town meeting, and we were in a different place then, okay? We had gotten to the point where that budget was using about 1.6 or $1.7 million of free cash to balance the budget, which we're not doing anymore, okay? We have weaned ourselves off of the free cash for balancing the budget. But at that meeting, we were going to use 1.6 or $1.7 million of free cash, and we didn't have money that looked like it was going to be coming back as turnbacks or excess revenue. So we would have left ourselves with no free cash going into the next year. So once free cash was certified, there was a little bit of wiggle room. So immediately we cut $1.7 million for the budget, which were really difficult cuts. I mean, it was $800,000 from the school department and $800,000 from the government, the general government side. But we said we think we can restore about $600,000 of that in that fiscal year, which is what we did. So the net cut then was $1 million. But we have never been a budget with a lot of fat. I mean, there isn't a lot in this budget that you can cut and still be able to provide the services that the public wants. And what happens with that is if you start looking at that, you start reducing enforcement. You start saying, well, we'll respond to you when we can, but the list gets longer and longer. So I would say that there's a lot of things that this budget could use. We went for years and years without an HR director. We used to have a facilities manager that was a highly qualified, credentialed facilities director. And when he left, that position was downsized to a lower level position. And when that person left, it was downsized again to another lower level position. We used to have a superintendent in DPW and an assistant superintendent. When the superintendent retired, we replaced the assistant superintendent, moved up, but the assistant didn't. So little by little, we have whittled down. And are we still functioning? Yes, but there's not a lot in this budget without sort of starting to cripple the ability to do the municipal functions that are regulatory and need to get done. And this year is this was a challenging budget year. And if you look at sources and uses, which is in your tab 2, there are things in sources and uses that are really important to look at, because sources and uses gives you the revenue side and it gives you the expenditure side. And if you look at new growth, for example, I mean, the Proposition 2.5 is Proposition 2.5, you get that. But when you look at new growth, so for the FY25 budget, new growth was estimated at $517,742, and this year it's estimated at $300,000. So that's a reduction of available revenue of $217,000. That's a question the Finance Committee, when you look at that, that's a question you ask administration to explain. Like, why are we doing that? What's happening in the trend of new growth that we're doing that? The debt exclusion is down, but that's based on the fact that as our debt exclusion, the amount that we voted to exclude from Proposition 2.5, we make level principal payments and decreasing interest payments. So the principal is going to stay through the same over the 20 years, but the interest is going to go down each year. And a couple years ago, we passed the high point of the debt exclusions that we voted, and so now it's going down a little bit. The couple of the other things that are interesting in this sources and uses is the other excise room hotel. which is increasing 200,000. And that, if you look at the tax recap, which is done by the Department of Revenue every year, they compare what you estimated the income to be and what the actual was. And so you can look and say, well, we underestimated that. And that's been kind of an area that we have underestimated, because when the short-term rental tax came on, it was really hard to predict what was going to happen. So we've got, this $520,000 salary reserve for like collective bargaining. So that's a big number that we had to come up with in this year's budget. So that 200,000 is there. Investment income was assumed to be better. Miscellaneous recurring revenue is up 150,000. And the major change there is moving from $600,000 of host community fee from ISWM to a higher budgeted host community fee. And for a long time, we kept it at 600,000 because the future of ISWM was not certain. Until we got the site assignment, until we knew that it was going to be able to go past 2027, 2028, we were very cautious about how much money we were relying on from ISWM. So, but the budgeted amount, when you look at ISWM, is over $1 million. So we're not over budgeting that, but we're taking a little bit more for the operation. That helped us build. The other thing that we have that's increasing this year is the miscellaneous recurring energy credits, which is the money that we get from the solar panels that we participate in. So those are some of the, where we've changed what we're doing on the revenue side, which is important for you all to understand, like, where is this revenue coming from and how is it changing and why is it changing? On the expense side, there's a couple things that are kind of interesting. There was a change in OPEB. So OPEB is our other post-employment benefit liability. And we had been pretty aggressive over the last couple years in funding OPEB, which has been really beneficial in terms of reducing our liability. So we're in a much better place than we were like 10 years ago when we didn't have anything. But we changed the policy. And the policy was that we were going to take 10% of the prior year's new growth and add it to the prior year's budgeted amount for OPEB. So we would be gradually doing more and more and more. But this year, in order to kind of be able to make the numbers work for this year's operations, we said that our policy calls for a minimum of $250,000 to be paid towards the liability every year. And so that's what we're budgeting. In the budget, we're putting in the $250,000 minimum that we have to fund, and that gave us a little bit of extra revenue, less expenditure to work with. The other thing you have to look at is group insurance. Our group insurance this year is up 8.4%, which is higher than it has been, but really favorable compared to some of the other ways that people are doing it. So we've self-insured. We've been very lucky in our self-insurance since, I don't want to say 2005 was when we had kind of a little bit of a hick with that. But so we've been lucky with that. But that's something to monitor, because as if those numbers go up, it starts taking more and more of the percentage of your budget. I mean, we're up to about almost 12% of the total budget, and that's a lot for that one item. And it is something that's been talked about in terms of the legislature for something that needs reform, but it's really hard to get that conform in the right way. Sources and uses is your friend. Look at it, kind of make sure that you understand all the quality, all the categories, and make sure to ask questions about that. The one thing that I want to touch on a little let's see if anybody else has any questions, because I'll talk about my.
So about OPEB, the new policy says something about that 250, which is not, it doesn't have any built-in increase, would be reassessed. How will we, do you figure out how much we really need, or how much, we can afford to put into that any given year?
Well, Marlene I think, should answer that question. It's kind of a combination of things. So you want to answer that question?
With all due respect, this is a conversation between the Finance Committee and individuals, so I'm not going to participate. I'll listen, and then we can schedule agenda items in the future if you like.
Okay.
So what we've done in the past, Jim, is we had, part of our policy was to look at a percentage of free cash. And I don't think the policy includes that anymore. So looking at what gets certified as free cash, look at, like Siegel does an actuarial analysis, and they'll be doing another one. So be aware of those. Ask for the actuarial analysis, and then look and ask in the fall town meeting, are we going to be adding anything extra towards the OPEB liability, and do we need to? Because we're getting close to what we need to put in. Because OPEB, our retired employee and retired teacher insurance payments that we make every year count towards our OPEB liability. They're part of, that's a payment towards OPEB liability, plus any additional that you put in. And because we've now put in a lot of money, we're in a much better place than we were.
Thank you. You had mentioned the facilities manager before, that the town used to have one. Were they in charge of, responsible for all of the public buildings?
No, he did help the schools a lot, but it was the municipal side. It wasn't, some towns do a shared facilities director, where part of the salary is paid by the schools and part's paid by the town, and they work at it. But it was, we were in a situation in 2005, 2006, 2010, when we did the Cecil report. Our capital facilities were really in difficult shape. I mean, and so the Cecil group did a report that helped us prioritize which facilities we're going to work on in what order, and we're still working on that plan. I mean, we're 15 years later, but we're still working on that plan. But it's how we prioritize the police station, and then the Peebles School into the intermediate school. And we had done the DPW facility, we had to do that facility. So the Bourne School was done in like 2005. We're just coming up pretty, so each piece you have to kind of do, but it's important to prioritize that. And not just to look at this year's capital plan, but to look at the 5-year capital plan. And the capital plan for debt exclusion is where the biggest impact is going to be on the taxpayer. And that's something to manage in terms of how much you ask for, when you ask for it, and how it fits in the debt that's coming off. So the debt schedule that's in your tab 14 is only the current debt. It's only what's already on the books. It doesn't include anything that you're considering or could be adding in the future.
Could you give me the name of that report? You said the Cecil report?
The Cecil report, yes.
And this was a long-term plan for the town to?
Yeah, it was a facilities assessment that created a long-term prioritized plan. Out of that report, we moved the headquarters, the fire headquarters, out of the Buzzards Bay building and into the Sagamore station. That was part of the recommendation of that report. They had recommended that the Buzzards Bay Fire Station be rehabbed and not an immediate renovation. The police station was a very high priority need. The library, this was 5 years after the library had gone for a debt exclusion in 2005 and again in 2008 that failed, and the Cecil report said if we can't get a debt exclusion for it, look at smaller projects and get it done over time. It's been a while, but I think the report is still pretty valid in terms of priorities.
It just seems like over the last several years, we've had a lot of unexpected large repair requests come before us. You know, and I mean, they need to be done, there's no question about it. But it's that question of, if somebody was staying on top of it, couldn't we either prevented it or mitigated it by earlier repairs or something?
So let's talk about the middle school roof, okay? Because the middle school roof, which is, now we've signed paperwork for that to go through the MSBA loan, the Mass School Building loan process for accelerated roof repair. That roof has been problematic pretty much since the solar panels were put on. Gale is their consultant. They did a report and they said there were fasteners weren't properly sealed and there were some problems with the installation, but the contractor that did the installation went bankrupt, so there wasn't a lot of recourse in getting it fixed. So we've repaired it as much as we can. But in addition, the solar panels were on a contract. And if you take the solar panels off before the end of the contract, you have to pay for taking the solar panels off. You have to pay for putting the solar panels back on. And we were looking at a $3.5 million roof and a little bit leery about taking the solar panels off and putting the solar panels on. So a couple years ago, we did about $400,000 of temporary repairs to that middle school roof to keep it going to the point where solar panels are coming off. The contract ends this April, so now they can take the solar panels off, and they're responsible for taking the solar panels off and restoring the roof to a point where it's in good shape. And so now we've qualified, we've met the requirement for a 20-year-old roof that can go to MSBA, and they have in the past paid about 40% of the cost. So we had to wait, but we waited until it made, until we could do it with cost efficiently. So the hope with having a facilities director is that your facilities plan has the repairs on it in the capital plan that you need to keep those surprises, but you have to maintain your facilities. Your capital plan's going to have high maintenance, especially if you have older buildings. There's going to be maintenance costs. And the biggest thing that happened when we did get a facilities director was that those things were on the plan. We went from a department head trying to figure out what he needed to have as facilities for his department, for his building, to a facilities director assessing the building and saying, you have to get the chiller done, you have to get this done, you have to get that done. And we had done the facilities maintenance system. We did the Dude Solutions system. Unfortunately, it was all done and then COVID came, and so when they were supposed to train the department heads, it was that March. And so we never really implemented that, but there was an assessment of a lot of the buildings and the systems and the mechanical systems, making sure your mechanical systems are kept up. And I think we're doing a better job now. We've done a project for repointing the bricks at the Sagamore Fire Station so they don't get to a point where they're not functioning and become a major repair. So that's really important to get those maintenance things done.
Thank you. Go ahead. You've mentioned a couple of times about various grants that are available out there. What what buildings in town would qualify for existing grants that have been in place for a long time? I mean, we always hear about the school grants, related, and we just heard something about library grants.
Right.
Are there others out there, and
There might be some, I mean, there are a lot of matching grants for a lot of things that have to do with climate or the low-lying roads or transportation improvements. The biggest ones are the school, MSBA, and the library. The library grants generally pay 40 to 50% they pay 50% of eligible construction costs. But some of the costs are not eligible. So there was a recent project in Grafton that was a $16 million project. It was a $21,000 building, now 21,000 square foot building. And this was a couple of years ago. I want to say like 5 years ago. So it was a $60 million project. $2 million of the cost was not eligible because it was furniture or fixtures or whatever. But the Grafton grant was $7 million on that $16 million building. So that program has changed a bit. So it used to be that there was a planning portion of it and a construction portion of it. Actually, they rolled out a new process in the 23-24 grant where now you have to go through their planning process in order to qualify for the construction. So what we're doing right now for the library is not under that planning process. So that would mean that going forward with the library project under this feasibility and with the OPM would not be eligible for the library grant.
just this portion, or we wouldn't be eligible for a grant at all?
Well, you have to, so they're in a process, right? They accepted applications at 23-24. They accepted grant applications that were due May 2024. We did not apply. The next round for that is planned in fiscal year for 2027. So we'd have to wait a couple years before we could apply. But we would, going forward in what's sort of proposed now, we would not be eligible for any grant for the library.
Any more questions? Anyone have any questions?
One quick question, and thanks so much, MJ, for coming to talk with us. Is there any possibility for something like the library we could finance the shell and then apply for a grant to build out the spaces of the interior? Is there any appetite?
I can't answer that question. I don't think so. I think, so originally, way back when, the library was the first grant that was available. And when the school buildings started their grant program, they based it on the library program. And then the school building authority found that if they didn't incorporate, if they allowed the towns and the schools to go out and do their own planning, that either they planned for too much, or the way it used to work with the school building authority, you had to wait for your funding. Like they'd approve your project, but they wouldn't be able to give you the funding right away. So they changed their whole process to make it, you come to us, if you qualify, we're going to take you through a planning process. We have a review board that reviews your plans to make sure that they're not overbuilding, that they're meeting our requirements. And then once you go through that planning process, you do the construction process. So that's what the library grant program has now adopted.
Okay.
They do have an emergency thing where if you have some sort of catastrophic problem, that you can do an emergency planning, but I don't know what the qualifications of that are.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, MJ.
Okay, next. Time meeting articles, the application of nitrogen fertilizer, citizen petition.
Yes. Good evening, my name is Bill Grant. I am the proponent of the citizen petition. The citizen petition will also call for a home rule petition. The warrant article is not going to get points for originality. It's a carbon copy of Falmouth's bylaw, which has been in effect since 2014. You're going to be hearing a lot over the coming months and years about nitrogen loading in our waters. The comprehensive wastewater plan was recently rejected. It's going to come before the town to come up with a new plan, but nitrogen loading is a huge issue for us. We're a little behind other towns. Other towns have, as you probably all know, have already started sewering and other remediation. They say of nitrogen loading in the embayments, roughly 85% is from septic. The remaining 15 is from stormwater runoff and fertilizer. The fertilizer is the subject of this bylaw. To cut to the essence of it, it prohibits the use of nitrogen-based fertilizer with 100 feet of a water resource area. The obvious reason for that is you get a heavy rain, you have watering systems, you have fertilizer, it goes right into the water. So Falmouth came up with this. I'll try to make it brief because I know you all have a long night ahead of you. So the first thing people say when you say a nitrogen control bylaw is, how do you enforce it? That's been asked by the town employees and everybody else I've talked to about it. There is no enforcement mechanism. Again, to be blunt, this is really an education bylaw. We need for the town to understand the impact of nitrogen loading in our embayments. I'm before you explaining it. I'll be before other committees in town, and I will be at town meeting explaining it. The Falmouth approach is, again, the same, education, no fines, no people looking in garbage cans to see if the wrong fertilizer was applied, but just let people know through this process that's not healthy for our waters. The advantage of this approach, of course, is the comprehensive wastewater plan provides for innovative alternate systems being installed at great expense to the homeowner, or sewers at great expense to the homeowners and derivatively the taxpayers because it'll be funded by the town. The advantage to this is it's no cost. Just stop using fertilizer. The disadvantage is it's not a huge impact. It's relatively small, but it's achievable. We can do something to reduce nitrogen loading immediately if we can convince people to stop using nitrogen-based fertilizer. So that's the import of this plan. Again, it's based on Falmouth, so naturally I discussed it with Falmouth. Many other towns in the Cape already have fertilizer bylaws in effect. What's happening with them is usually they're bumping them up, trying to make them stricter and wider ranging. Orleans is probably the leader of all this. They're banning all use of fertilizer, or it will be at their town meeting, to ban all use of fertilizer throughout the town, phosphorus and nitrogen-based fertilizers. So this is a baby step, but I think the education process can help in our water quality. There are elements of it that I should mention. Again, it's with 100 feet of a protected water resource area. There are maps that show where those are. The town has those available. Falmouth sends out letters to all properties that are within 100 feet of a water resource area and reminds people of the bylaw. They send that out every year. They also had a program, Falmouth Friendly Lawns, where they had educational programs throughout the town. Whether we do similar endeavors to try to let people know about the harmful effects of fertilizer loading in our embayments is up to the town. This is a bylaw. The town will decide if it has the resources to have the educational programs or the letters going out. What it is saying, the town saying, nitrogen fertilizer is hurting our waters. Don't use it. If people say they're going to use it anyway, that's life, I suppose. But I really hope that this education process would convince people that it's not a good idea. It's in no one's long-term interest. The Department of Natural Resources and Conservation Department would be the enforcement mechanism. I've made clear what the enforcement really is, though, is hopefully changing public opinion. The fertilizer bylaw applies to fertilizer on grass only. The bylaw does not apply to fertilizer used on flower and vegetable gardens, greenhouses, houseplants, farm, or orchard. The bylaw also does not apply to the establishment or repair of turf. The bylaw bans fertilizing any part of your lawn between October 16th and April 14th, or directly before or during a heavy rain event. Don't spill fertilizer on paved surfaces and quickly clean it up if you do. The bylaw recommends that if you fertilize lawns not covered by the 100-foot prohibition, fertilize sparingly. While not mandated, other towns have, as I say, education and have worked with the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension to educate the public, and also through community workshops. And I should mention also that the golf courses are not covered. They are covered within the 100 feet, but they can use low-release fertilizers. It's a business, and so there's an accommodation made for them. But they're also encouraged to, in general, not use quick-release fertilizers on the property. The other mechanism for enforcement, of course, would be the Concom could put an order of condition on new developments that nitrogen fertilizer would not be used. But that, again, would be up to the Conservation Commission whether they would choose to do that. I would hope they would. So that's, in a nutshell. Like I say, you have a long night, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but if there are any questions about this.
Go ahead.
Okay. Is this intended to be a town bylaw?
Yes,
Okay, then why are you referring it to the legislature?
because there is a state law, the state has regulations, so we need a home rule petition if we have any regulation of the use of fertilizer. There's a state law regarding that, not nearly as restrictive as this.
So this would have to go to the legislature,
Yes,
and then we would be then subject to certain state laws?
we are now. We have been. That state law was amended some years ago. I'm not an expert in what that law provides, but it doesn't have any impact that I've been able to see on our use of fertilizers.
Okay, so you've made some representations that the Concon can step in and do this or that. Once we get a state law, that's going to supersede the town bylaw.
It would, if it conflicted. That's why we have to submit this to the state. This law was submitted by Falmouth to the state when the state law existed, and they gave approval to enforce or pass this.
Okay.
When Falmouth did it in 2013, it was also sent to the state. They had a couple questions, remanded it. It was discussed further, and then they put this bylaw into effect. I'm not sure what the provisions were before the
Town did.
bylaw. Falmouth, yes.
So they put this bylaw, and they did not go to the legislature,
They did go to the legislature. The
It-
legislature kicked it back.
right?
I'm not sure why. They sent it back. They passed it anew. As I say, they must have made minor changes. They resubmitted it to the state. The state approved the bylaw before you today.
Okay. You've made some, you've got recommendations in here.
Yes.
So I think, recommendations are not standards that the public actually has to abide by.
Yeah. I'd like it to be a little more forceful myself, but You know, when you're restricting people's use of their private property and what they can do on their private
Right.
property, raise a lot of issues.
Right.
And I thought a baby step is better than no step at all. Most towns on Cape Cod already have these laws.
Amanda?
Why are you going this route if you're basically just trying to educate people? You could send flyers, you could create a Facebook page with information, send out mailers, hold group meetings to really educate the public. Why are you doing it this way versus other methods?
Frankly, it's more forceful. It's a bylaw. If someone wants to go to their neighbor and say, we have a bylaw, I think it has more force. I guess that could be debated.
But there's no consequence and there's no, like, testing for it and a large fine for enforcement. There's, I mean, it references, you know, the Department of Natural Resources and Concom that could enforce it, but what are they really enforcing? There's no, you know, is there something in here that they're testing
Well,
for enforcement? There's no fine. I mean, to get people to change, they need an incentive to do so.
Well, the letters that go out in Falmouth remind people that there's a bylaw in town, and it's an acknowledgement by the citizens that we care about this. If you have an education program, people would say, well, who says? This says. The town passed a bylaw saying it.
So I'd add a fine in there and with guidelines for imposing that fine.
I'm not sure it would pass in Bourne, to be honest. As a matter of fact, I think it probably wouldn't. The Concom can do an order of conditions. The Department of Natural Resource can send out letters, but I'm not in a position to order them to do so. I would hope if the bylaw provided this, they would see fit to do that, because the town has spoken. We think this is important. We think we should cut down on nitrogen loading in our embayments.
I understand there's no enforcement, but would businesses that, you know, commercial places that apply fertilizer for you, would they be more accountable in some way? Would they just know that to work in this town, they're not supposed to do that? Well, they would know it, but is there any,
What other towns have done, as I say, I have a list of the towns that have these similar bylaws. They go to lawn maintenance companies and encourage them to use certain fertilizers that are nitrogen, are not high nitrogen or quick release nitrogen. Again, it's the education program with the local companies. The companies are, you know, if they say that this customer insists on it, well, we can't do anything about it. But if they have other customers that are up in the air, Falmouth has a list of recommendations to use compost, top dress with compost, other natural ways to keep the lawn. And quite frankly, you know, if you have a lawn that's got some non-grass growth, they're called Cape Cod lawns. But that again is you can't mandate people. It's private property. They're going to do what they're going to do. You can encourage it. The town can speak on the issue, but anything beyond that. Now again, other towns do have enforcement mechanisms. I think. Well, I haven't researched it, but the ones I've reviewed, some of them do have enforcement mechanisms. Different towns.
thank you.
This is Bourne.
Amanda?
So who would be required to inform those local companies? You're saying that would be put on the town resources to go to the local, the weed mans, the, you know, the
Well,
other.
again, the town considered proposing it, the select board considered it, and they've got a lot on their plate. The comprehensive wastewater management plan, it may lead to a watershed permit, and if a watershed permit is pursued, the watershed permit does usually require nitrogen fertilizer restrictions. So it would probably come up sooner or later in this town anyway. But at this point, we're not saying the Concom or Department of Natural Resources is mandated to do it. I don't think anybody would, you know, in our position would want to tell the town what to do. I would hope they would take it upon themselves to do it, find the resources. The town will have spoken that we think this is important because they passed the bylaw, I hope.
Tom?
Is it worth it or possible or advisable to give a list of alternative products that can be used? And do the research, because the average homeowner is probably not going to research that very much. probably just gonna continue to do what
I
they're
agree.
doing, but if they had a list of products, you've done the research, maybe that would help.
Again, I'm not reinventing the wheel here. Other towns have done just that. They've gone to local hardware stores and lawn supply operations and given them a list of products that are healthier and don't have as much nitrogen or a quick-release nitrogen. They have such lists. But again, that's an undertaking that I think as more attention is paid to nitrogen loading, we're going to be talking about this more. This is just the first wave. The comprehensive wastewater management plan is complex, it's expensive, and it's going to lead to a lot of discussions about what can be done to address the problem. Yes.
Just two things. Is first, the title of your article, I thought this was going to be the opposite. I thought it was somebody coming in to ask to spread nitrogen, and that was going to be a hard no right from the very beginning. So maybe just reword what you're trying to say. And I mean, I'm 100%. I was like, why not all waters? Why not make it even harder to use the nitrogen fertilizer? And Bill, what town are you from, or village are you from?
Katomet.
Katomet. I just think it's important when you talk about that at the town meeting, which I'm assuming you are, that you are local, not just somebody coming in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good idea.
But yeah, I was curious as it's, I mean, you said just some of the waterways, the protected waterways are going to be
Water resource areas.
water resource areas.
We have maps showing a water resource areas. It can be on a stream that empties directly into, the estuaries are the biggest problem.
Okay.
But if it's in a water resource area, we have a bylaw defining a water resource area, and we have very defined maps showing where they are. I could go into it, but I won't.
No, it's just that from my perspective, it should be all water, not just water estuaries or, protected waterways.
Other
But that's
towns
just
have done
my
that.
view, yeah.
Barnstable has a pretty strong one. So that they do exist, and I wouldn't be surprised if in future years the decision is made that we should bump it up.
Yeah. I mean, I'm within 100 feet. I mean, I'm one of these people, but yeah, so I'd love to have some neighbors come and listen.
Yeah.
Any more? All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
MJ's got a question.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I would like the Finance Committee to clarify whether this bylaw, if it is passed, becomes subject to Article 6.1 and 6.1.2 of the bylaws, which is the section on violations. So Section 6.1.1 says penalties, except where otherwise provided, any person violating any of the provisions of these bylaws, meaning the entire general bylaws, shall be subject to a penalty of not less than $50 or not more than $300 for each offense. Each day that the offense continues shall be considered a separate offense. And then Section 6.1.2 says how it's a non-criminal violation and how it gets done. But I'm not sure that it's, although there's no penalties specific in in their proposed bylaw, these sections may apply. And that's a question for legal counsel.
I also inquired of a number of other towns whether they have ever had enforcement issues, and none of them have. Falmouth has not run into it.
Actually, have they talked about their success? I mean, to be clear, I do agree with your message. It just doesn't, it seems like this isn't hitting the nail on the head here. I mean, it's just, a suggestion. It's not really enforcement to making sure that people are complying. And that's really where my questions are coming from.
Yeah, I've been active in town for many years, and I think if you had an enforcement and you were telling people what they cannot do on their private property, I have a real serious issue whether at this point it would pass. I think as people become more aware of nitrogen loading and become aware of the expense of an innovative alternative system or sewers, they're going to say, oh, let's go for this low-hanging fruit and be stricter about nitrogen application. But right now, it just doesn't seem the time.
Any more comments, questions?
Thank you.
All right, next, consent item agendas, Erica and Marlene.
Thank you. So, at each annual Maytown meeting, Article 1 is the consent agenda, which is a standard group of routine business items to put before the meeting. So those are included for you in Article 1 in the draft warrant. The only changes are number 2, the elected official salaries. Those have all been increased by 2.5% for FY '26 over the FY '25 numbers. Otherwise, I'm happy, Eric and I are happy to answer any questions that anyone may have about these provisions.
I have a question, and if the answer's not obvious, I'll just kick down the road. But the first one, I never really understood. The assumption of liability, that the town will assume a liability for damages the state might cause in improving, developing, maintaining, and protecting of tidal and non-tidal rivers and streams, et cetera, et cetera. Do you know what that means?
So, because the waterways laws are really so old in Massachusetts, this is tied back to kind of the work done in navigable waters, and it is something that if the state is doing work, I can't think of an example right now, but if the state is doing work on their property that causes damage, we indemnify them if they damage us in some way. So it's really, if you think of it along the lines of I'm sorry, the word is escaping me, but the state has,
Like sovereign immunity or something?
yes, yes, immunity. Thank you. So if you think of it as the state has immunity, this is really kind of along those lines where if there's unintentional damage caused, I mean, if it's negligence or if there's, cause, but if there's unintentional damage caused, especially in a storm event where a state wharf or something is damaged and blows into the town's assets, we don't then, try to sue them for that. It is an arcane law. There are not a lot of state waterway assets in this particular town, but in other cities and towns, this is, there's a higher exposure of risk, especially in working harbors, working waterfronts with a lot of wharves and piers. But it's something that is standard across the Commonwealth, that cities and towns are, obligated essentially to do this.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you for helping me with immunity.
All right, so, go ahead.
So for the elected official's salary, item C, it says select board chair, one at $4,590, but it says for a total of $4,704.75.
You know what? I only updated the second number, so the correct number is 4704.75. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Good pickup.
The 4590 is the current, and then the 4704 is the 2.5% on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I don't want to keep you here all night, but now the next one's revolving funds. So how does that work again? How does that money get into a revolving fund?
So usually these are fees paid by participants. So if we use the recreation program fund as an example, the people who sign up, and there may be a small fee charged if you want to participate in a program, That fee is put into the revolving fund, and then that revolving fund is used to pay the cost of bringing in the instructor. So these are program areas that are self-supporting and that rely on participant fees.
All right, thank you. All right, any more discussion or questions?
Just a follow-up to the revolving one. So as an example, the Recreation Programs Fund has a spending limit of $175,000. That means that somewhere else in their budget, there is a collection of revenue of $175,000. It's just net zero.
Correct. They can't spend, so if, they can't spend more than that in any given year.
Okay.
So they can offset, they can do up to $175,000 of worth of programming.
So even if they got in $200,000, they still can only spend the $175,000.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next, committee reports.
Committee reports is one of the standing articles on the warrant, and this allows any committee or officer, state or local officer, to give a report to the town meeting.
Thank you. Any comments or questions about that? Thanks. Stabilization Fund?
Erica, I'll let you speak to that one.
Sure. Good evening. So the stabilization fund is to maintain compliance with our financial policies in our quote-unquote rainy day fund. So our current financial policy is to maintain a minimum balance of 6% and not to exceed 10%. We are currently maintaining the balance as of December 31st, $5,197,031, which is 6.3% of the fiscal 26 anticipated general fund operating budget. I am recommending that we appropriate $200,000 from free cash to this fund to continue to grow the fund towards the 10%.
Thank you.
And most likely at your next week's meeting, I will have a set of articles with draft motions, which is where we'll lay out the amounts to be transferred into the article, into the funds.
Thank you. Any questions or comments about stabilization fund? Thanks. Next, capital stabilization fund.
Erica, I'll defer to you.
I'll take that one as well. The capital stabilization fund, in recent years, we have been utilizing this fund to maintain an average of 3 to 5 years of debt service payments within the fund. So this is the contribution to the fund to maintain that for the capital purchases that we made from the fund. So that would be approximately $345,000 this year. The balance in the fund post the January special town meeting for the Clay Pond Road purchase is $1,681,350.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions, comments? Capital, okay.
I'm
Go
just
ahead.
sorry, quick question is, will we have a number at the end of the budget process of what we expect our debt funding to be for next year, if we approve all the articles?
So if all of the borrowing articles pass.
Because there's some big ones this year.
Yes, if all of the borrowing articles pass, there will be schedules prepared for those.
Okay, so we'll have that before we vote on the articles.
Yes.
Perfect, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Terrell?
Thank you. Is it still true that town meeting vote puts money into stabilization fund? Town meeting vote is the only way it comes out of stabilization fund? A majority vote in and a 2/3 vote out? Is that still true?
That is correct. Yes, in order to withdraw money from from any fund, a fund, really, town meeting action is required. Stabilization funds require a supermajority. The stabilization fund, not the special purpose stabilization fund. So the capital stabilization fund is a special purpose stabilization fund, and it requires a simple majority. Your general stabilization fund requires a supermajority
Thank you.
of town meeting to withdraw and use the money.
All right, next, transfer ISWIM stabilization fund to ISWIM OPEB trust fund.
This was a recommendation from the OPEB working group, the OPEB trustees. And Erica, do you want to provide some additional background?
Sure. So this fund was set up many years ago to offset the cost that may have been accumulated by the town if the landfill were to shut down, but that's no longer an immediate worry for the town. So it makes sense that, and these funds originated from enterprise fund, landfill retained earnings, that we transfer this to the OPEB trust fund and apply it towards the ISWIM, the enterprise funds liability. And by doing so, it actually has an impact on the entire OPEB trust fund, and it increases that.
How much money is it, Erica?
Oh, the amount currently in the fund is $581,000.
So
Give or take.
excuse me, are ISWIM employees in a separate OPEB funded thing than the rest of the employees?
So they are considered a liability of the town of Bourne. However, the ISWIM budget funds their portion. So at the end of the day, you know, at the absolute end of the day, if ISWIM were to close and not be generating revenue anymore, the town of Bourne would be responsible for those payments. But while ISWIM is operating, it has been, we've been working towards, and it's been our goal, to fully fund the ISWIM portion of the liability. So that is, you know, so that will be a fully funded liability, and that the town will not be ever, the goal is that the town will not ever be in a position of having to carry any of those costs in the event that ISWIM closes. We're not quite there yet. However, the gap is not very large. So at the end of the day, it is the same liability. They're included in the overall total liability, but we are funding them through the ISWIM operating budget, the enterprise budget.
Okay, thank you.
Does that also apply for other town departments that are income producing?
It applies for ISWIM and sewer. Those are the only
That's what I was
two
thinking of.
enterprise
Okay.
budgets. So sewer also funds a portion of the sewer employee
Great,
OPEB liability.
thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next, Human Services Grant Program.
I will introduce Debbie for this.
Thank you. Debbie Oliveri, I'm the co-chair for the Human Services Committee. The committee is asking to increase the funding for the Human Service Grant this year to $40,000, citing factors such as the rising cost of living, increases in annual requests, and higher printing costs for the resource guide. Historically, from 2001 to 2019, the funding levels for this program have fluctuated between $26,000 and $48,000. In 2020, the program transitioned into a grant model, excluding the VNA of Cape Cod contract, and the budget was reduced to $20,000, a figure that this has remained unchanged in the subsequent years. The committee emphasizes the importance of this funding, especially since Bourne does not have a dedicated human services department. The committee is responsible for recommending policies and potential programs related to the delivery of human services in Bourne. Additionally, the committee publishes a human services resource guide, which provides information on various services available to the residents. The increase in funding would support these initiatives and ensure that the vital services continue to meet the community's needs effectively. There are typically between 8 to 12 agencies that apply for this grant funding. And last year for FY '25, we had $38,700 in requests. The
Oh, Deb, you just hit mute.
Sorry. The year before, we had $47,000 in requests, and the year before that, we had $32,000 in requests, so. The agencies are typically the aid support of Cape Cod, Alzheimer Family Support, Big Brother, Big Sister, Bourne Friends Food Pantry, Consumer Assistance Council, the Duffy Health Center, Elder Services of Cape Cod and the Islands, Housing Assistance Corporation, Independence House, and South Coast Legal Aid.
Thank you. Any questions? Amanda?
So we're just they're requesting money and we're just handing them over money to those programs?
It comes out of free cash.
So this has been funded for a number of years, and the money is set aside in an article. So free cash money is transferred into an article that's available to the Human Services Committee. The Human Services Committee opens up an application period and receives and reviews applications, and then makes grants based on what they receive to spend down the article.
Okay. And what are your guidelines for the applications?
These are nonprofit human service agencies. They have to fill out an application. They have to submit reports on how many Bourne residents are served. And, you know, it's quite extensive reports that they send in to us.
Thank you. Any, go ahead.
Is there a number already in the budget, and they're just asking to go up to 40?
So last year, or for this current fiscal year, I believe it was funded at $20,000. Is that correct, Deb?
That's correct.
So FY '25, town meeting funded the article at $20,000. The request for FY '26 is to fund it at $40,000.
And that would come out of?
Free cash,
Free cash.
yes.
And is there 20,000 in the free cash?
There is, yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Next, funding small department equipment.
Thank you. So this would be a new article. So again, an article that would be funded using free cash, where town meeting would transfer a sum of money into the article that could then be drawn down over multiple fiscal years if necessary to spend it down. So the idea here is really, we're seeing some requests from departments that do not meet the capital threshold of $25,000. You know, so they're less than $25,000, but they're for one-time expenses that are foreseen. So they're one-time expenses, so I don't necessarily want departments to be putting them in operating budgets, because, you know, we don't necessarily need to budget for them year after year. And because they are foreseen, we don't necessarily want to, you know, start using the reserve fund transfer and coming to the finance committee, because those are really for the reserve fund is for unforeseen or emergency. So we've got this group of expenditures. The most recent one that we saw was, I think it was about an $8,000 request for a new fence to be put up around the garage at the back of Town Hall. So $8,000, not a capital request. It's a new fence. We're not repairing or replacing an old fence that fell down, so it's not unforeseen. We're planning on a new investment of the money, or a new use of the money. And it's one time. I don't necessarily want to put $8,000 in the DNR operating budget for those uses. So we've been kind of looking at this for a little while now, and what I would like you to consider and discuss is setting aside an article. I'm gonna recommend $50,000 from free cash to be transferred into an article to be used for these types of expenses. So, non-capital, one-time, non-reoccurring, foreseen expenses. Because there's really, I've been kind of racking my brain, and I don't see a proper mechanism to fund these. Otherwise, what we would do is go to town meeting for each individual request as a separate article. And that seems to be a little onerous for a non-capital item to have, an article to fund $5,000 here or $5,000 there. So I'm trying to balance not abusing our existing funding mechanisms and not creating a situation where if you have a little something you need, you end up having to go for a full-blown standalone article. So that's the intent behind it. So it's something that is new, and is something that we should certainly discuss and can, I'd like to hear your thoughts and considerations about it.
Do you see it as having some constraint on that upper limit? Like it go up to the $25,000 thing that qualifies as capital? Or?
If it qualifies as, if the project hits the capital threshold, it would be funded through the capital process.
Anything up to there could potentially, is
So
one
it-
time.
So, the capital article, the capital definition is $25,000. So if there's let's say the shop needs another compressor, not replacing an existing compressor, but let's say they need a compressor and it's $18,000. This article could be used to fund that because it does not meet the definition of capital. It's a new second one. It's not an unforeseen failure of an existing one. And it's not something that should be budgeted in the operating budget as recurring. So if it's under $25,000, it would qualify for use from money from this article.
Thanks. Amanda?
So I understand what you're trying to do. How do we maintain transparency with articles in general, it seems like we approve them and then we don't generally hear about them again unless maybe we're closing them out. So how do we maintain transparency into the spending for this, and how is it added to our planning? So if you're adding a compressor, won't that need maintenance? Is that going to be added to a plan where service is going to be, another compressor to the contract? Perhaps it increases the contract fee by chance. That will be added into the operating budget. So how do we keep track of the big picture as well?
So any article, whether it's an article like this or any other article that we spend out of, we can provide essentially what that money has gone to. So that can be something that can be requested on a regular basis. As far as planning kind of ongoing maintenance, I definitely see that for the capital. I can't really think of anything right now where we would be like driving a large service cost.
Okay.
Capital items, certainly, if we're adding another generator to our service contract, that could drive us, drive a cost of some sort. I think that's a great question. I can't think of anything right now where it would drive a large operating cost. But if there was an associated operating cost, that would be captured in a future operating budget.
Right, so I was just thinking if, you know, it was gonna be forthcoming, that would be something, you know, we're buying this generator, say it's $9,000, now we have to add it to the service contracts, you know, you're gonna plan for that to be put in the operating budget, so that would be a foreseen expense.
Yeah. If we were buying if we were buying like a trailer generator for $9,000, it wouldn't go on our service contract.
Okay.
So our service and maintenance agreements are for the big stationary ones, you know, the $200,000 ones. So because there's all different scales, it's,
Yep, I don't wanna go too far down the rabbit
Yeah.
hole, I'm just thinking for transparency for us and the voters as well.
Yeah.
You know, they've approved this funding, what is it going towards?
So are you envisioning something that had, let's say, a balance of 50,000, and if we spent 20 next year, we'd put it back up to 50?
not necessarily. I think it would be something that we would want to wait and see how it goes. If because it's an article, it would roll over from one fiscal year to another. It doesn't close out at the end of the fiscal year. And if it takes, you know, 3 or 4 years to spend it down, then we can consider coming back when it's spent down. I wouldn't necessarily need it to, it's not a fund, so it doesn't need to stay, it doesn't need to be, but a balance doesn't need to be maintained. It's an article, so it can be spent down to 0, and then when it's expended, if we feel like it worked well, then we can do it again.
Okay.
And I know we've had a couple requests for approvals after the budget's gone through, but there must be somebody needed that piece of equipment in their lab or something, that they have put it in their operating budget? Because even though it's just a one-time, hey, I need a new way to weigh my waste or whatever, I don't know, run a pH, I need a new titrator. So would they have put that in their regular budget?
If it's a piece of equipment that we wouldn't be buying year after year,
Right.
then no, it really shouldn't be going necessarily in the operating budget. So we do have a line for computers in the operating budget, because we know we're gonna need to replace so many computers every year. That's just a cost of doing business. But if it's something that a particular department uses and it's a one-time thing, then it really shouldn't go in the operating budget.
Okay.
Any more questions, comments? No. All right, thank you. Next, adopt prudent investor rules.
I'll turn this one over to Erica.
Thanks, Ben. So in the fiscal '24 budget, the governor approved the use of prudent investor rules for trust funds for municipalities. And what this does is it allows the treasurers to broaden our options available to meet the 3 goals of balancing safety, liquidity, and yield when investing in public funds. So, and this does require a local option to move forward with investing in these manners.
What kind of things will you be able to do with fund money that you can't do up till now?
So we're limited as to what type of investments we can choose or stocks. So this would allow for more diversification of the funds, which can ultimately result in, a lower risk and increase our returns. For example, we're limited to a certain percentage of stocks that we can invest in, and they must be on the legal list. So this will kind of, again, broaden that up and this is just for trust funds, things that we plan on holding on to for a long time.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Sounds good, thank you. Next, adopt HEROES Act.
This one is also Erica.
Recently, a piece of legislation was passed that added 2 new local options to increase certain veteran exemptions. So the Board of Assessors did have a meeting last week, and they have voted to move forward with both of the 2 new local options. So it increases the real estate tax exemption for veterans.
Thank you.
Increases it to what?
Currently, it's a 50%, it would basically double it. I would have to get the exact numbers for you.
Okay, thank you.
I believe it's around 800, but don't quote me.
Any other questions or comments on that? Thank you. Next, zoning, multifamily housing, section 3.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
I'm Jen Copeland, Town Planner, and I'm here to provide an update on the multifamily housing. An MBTA community shall have a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right. The district has to have a reasonable size and a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, and be located not more than a half a mile from a commuter rail station, subway station, ferry terminal, or bus station, if applicable. The Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities oversees compliance of the 3A requirements. For Bourne, the unit capacity is 557 housing units. While we don't have a commuter rail in town, the long-term goal is to create a commuter station in the downtown district of Buzzards Bay. So the downtown district is comprised of 4 sub-districts: the core, the gateway, the waterfront, and the neighborhood. The core sub-district is largely commercial and mixed use. The gateway sub-district is located on the eastern side of Buzzards Bay near the Bourne Bridge and the Old Approach. And the waterfront sub-district is located on the western side of downtown Buzzards Bay. And it includes a limited passenger service train for the Cape Flyer only right now. Lastly, the neighborhood sub-district is comprised of primarily single-family and two-family residential uses. The core, the gateway, and the waterfront sub-districts were chosen to allow for by right development of multifamily units consistent with Section 3A. So we submitted an action plan back in 2023, and we have been working diligently on this. We also submitted last May, we submitted a pre-adoption review application to the state. So the state will actually look at the proposed changes and give us comments on it, on whether or not it will comply with it. And I just recently met with them back in February of this year. It took a little while to get a meeting with them. And based on their comments, we are removing all of the parcels that are located on Main Street to comply with this new ordinance. The Main Street parcels have ground floor limitation, which means that it has to be commercial on the first floor with residential units above it. So those parcels were removed, and we're still working on the compliance modeling to make sure that our density and unit capacity meets this requirement. So once I submit that to the state, they will send us a letter regarding the pre-adoption review and say whether it will comply or not. So at this time, I would propose not having an article for annual town meeting, but bringing it to special town meeting.
The May special or the fall special?
The fall special.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, the fall special. It'll take a
clarify.
little time to do outreach and get the wording correct.
So it'll be removed from the May one?
Yes.
Yes, it'll be removed from the May one, okay.
Thank you. And This is not coming up now, right? But any questions or comments on this multifamily housing? All right, thank you.
How short are we of housing? I mean, how many more units would we have to put in?
557.
Oh, that was what you meant by the 557, more housing?
We need 557 more?
More.
Yes, that is the unit capacity for this multifamily housing.
And that's in this district?
In this
only.
district only.
So that number of units only in this district?
But the town is required to have how many units altogether?
Well, you're talking about.
What do you mean, to meet the
affordable
10%
housing?
minimum?
Affordable housing, right.
Oh, to meet the 10% minimum, it's around 1,000
But
units,
that's-
and we have about 650 or so.
Correct, but that is not what this is.
Right.
That is something totally different. This is not your subsidized housing inventory, and this is not your 40B number. This is a different number.
So this has to be within within that distance close to the transportation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And we're just required to have the language in place for the zoning?
Correct. Is it, you mean, yeah, just the language for the zoning, not the infrastructure and?
Correct.
Is that what?
Yeah, so
Right.
we're not on the hook, okay.
Yeah, they removed that out.
Yeah, so the zoning has to allow that. It doesn't mean that the town has to produce it. The market has to have the opportunity to do
Okay.
it,
All right, thank you.
right?
Mhm.
Okay.
And there'll be limitations on height and size and parking and green space, all that kind of stuff?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. There'll be site plan review.
In the article or just as part of the?
So what this proposal requires is that apartments be allowed by right rather than special permit, but it will still require site plan review.
I have a quick question. So how many locations in town? Is it only the Buzzards Bay train station, or is it the bus station, you know? Is it any place where a bus stops, or I'm trying to figure out, you know, what qualifies as a half-mile radius location?
So the planning board made the assumption that it would be the downtown district because we have the train available. And the downtown district is a little bit different because we have form-based code. So we already have the underlying zoning in place that would allow for that.
Okay, so there's only one location.
Well, it's the downtown core, the waterfront, and the gateway. So it's 3 areas. And so we're really looking at each individual parcel to make sure that they'll comply. And there's this intricate compliance modeling that we're doing right now to make sure every parcel complies with it.
Is there a graphic showing, you know, all the appropriate areas that's on the website or someplace?
No, we're still working on that,
Okay.
but there will be. There will
Okay.
be with each parcel.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Downtown sign bylaw?
Yes. This is going to be David O'Connor. He's a planning board member and design review committee member.
Mr. Chairman, the Design Review Committee was set up in 2013 to report to the Planning Board performing initial site plan reviews for proposed projects within the downtown and makes recommendations to the Planning Board to assist its approval process. DRC also approves the design of proposed commercial signs in the downtown before the Inspector of Buildings issues a sign permit. Over the past 12 years, DRC has seen more than a few instances of unpermitted signs, signs in need of repair, and first-time applicants confused by some part of the existing sign bylaw. I think a lot of us can name a business in the downtown that has had an abandoned sign long after that business went out of existence. With that in mind, the Planning Board is proposing an initiative to amend the sign bylaw as described in the warrant article before you.
These changes are intended to organize and streamline sign bylaw language to make regulations more user-friendly for first-time applicants, revise paragraphs that may be confusing, redundant, or should appropriately be covered in another section of the bylaw, better define non-conforming or grandfathered signs, define language on what is maintenance versus reconstruction of existing signs, again, grandfathered signs, clarify the enforcement process on unmaintained or abandoned signs, and perhaps most importantly, define new definitions to clarify term bylaws and to cover new technologies and advertising devices that we didn't consider 10, 12 years ago. I think the key thing that we want to emphasize is these proposed sign changes apply only to the downtown. They don't apply town-wide. The intent of the article is to encourage and guide sign improvements that will improve the visual coherence of the downtown business core without establishing a specific style or stifling any kind of creativity, and we hope will contribute to the goal of an attractive and vibrant business environment. Now, I can handle this any way you want, Mr. Chairman. We can, if the group would just like to ask questions, or we can hit some high points if you like.
One thing caught my eye was something about illumination of lights, because there seems to be a lot of light pollution in this town. I know you're talking only about this specific district, but there's a lot of glare,
Yes,
a lot of light pollution.
There is existing paragraph in the bylaw that does not allow backlit signs. We've got backlit signs. Some of them are grandfathered before those laws went into place, but we're slowly trying to address that. When you have a sign, no internal lighting, goosenecks that light it, either above or below, and glare guards as it looks appropriate. So there is coverage of that in the bylaw. We don't like light reflecting upward.
Any further questions, comments, Carla?
Yep. Notice like at the very beginning, you had crossed out the part about flashing lights.
Yes, that's a great example of a regulation that belongs in another location.
Okay.
So under general downtown sign regulations, this is the process, how you get the permit, the fact that you're required to get a permit, and who will grant you the permit. From time long ago, no sign shall be located over town property. No sign shall be attached to a tree or utility pole. Signs should not flash or blink. It doesn't belong there. That adds to the confusion for a first-time user. Those have been lifted out and put in another section, prohibited signs.
Okay.
So that part of this has been reorganized for readability and not having to go to the back, and that's not covered in unpermitted signs. You have to go back to general sign regulations to find it. We just moved it.
Thank you.
So it's already gone before the bylaw committee?
Zoning actually doesn't go to the
Oh, it
bylaw.
doesn't,
Only general bylaws.
Thank you.
Any questions? Mr. Terrell?
Mr. Chairman, Mark Terrell. Is downtown singularly defined in your zoning bylaw? Is there only one definition for downtown so that the reader will know exactly what we're talking
In
about?
terms of the jurisdiction of DRC review, it's essentially between the rotaries, maybe a little bit, up as far as the Speedway gas. But essentially, the downtown, what we think of as the downtown, between the rotaries.
Thank you.
Any questions? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
I had just a general question. Since this doesn't have to deal with finance, is that something we would have to, you would still vote on?
Yes.
Okay, next, any proposed budget adjustments for fiscal year '26?
I don't have any proposed budget adjustments for you tonight. We are still working on negotiations with the unions, so once we start closing those contracts, I'll come back to you with updated budgets, but none yet.
Thank you. So I was looking at the financial, relatively new financial policy. Thanks, Tom, for working on that. It said that we're to look at the Finance Committee reserve amount from time to time, see if it's adequate. Is 350,000 as a starting
I don't
balance?
think we funded it at 350 for FY '25. I think it was 275 for FY '25.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't have balance, but it's adequate, whatever we've been doing, or what we did last year.
Yeah, I think I sent along the balance the last time we had a reserve fund transfer request. I don't recall off the top of my head what it is.
Yeah, me either, but no change, okay. All right, next, minutes of February, we'll do February 3rd. I think we had an opportunity to look at those. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the draft minutes of February 3rd?
I will.
Thank you, Priscilla. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, or any further discussion on the minutes of February 3rd? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it unanimously. Next, the minutes of February 10th. Would someone like to make a motion about that? Priscilla?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Priscilla, thank you. Any further discussion on the minutes of February 10th? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? No, unanimous, thank you. So next meeting, St. Patrick's Day.
Whose idea was that?
We can celebrate on Sunday. So, we need to talk, when do you think, if we can ask your opinion, we'll be having specific things to vote on? Either articles or budget things.
So the warrant closes on Friday. The annual closes on Friday. The special closes on the 28th. Next week on March 17th, I plan on having this beginning of draft motions. So, I mean, you can kind of, it's your choice if you want to do them as we review things and you have draft motions, or if you want to save them all at once. Your Finance Committee report is due on April 15th.
Yes, thanks, sir. I'm on, yes.
And the voter handbook will go to the printers on April 18th. So all of the recommendations will need to be done before then.
Thanks. So anyone who's interested in working on the report, we could get together outside of here.
Okay.
So I think last year we voted on some article, and then it got changed afterwards, so I remember we had to do something twice, so we don't do things too early.
Right. We want to make sure things are kind of, the warrant is set.
Or some other committee with oversight had not yet reviewed it.
Yeah. But I do think, we'll meet next week on March 17th. I think most likely you should plan on a meeting on March 31st, then on April 7th and April 14th. And, those last two meetings are really where you would want to spend most of your time voting your recommendations by those April meetings.
Okay, thank you.
That's my recommendation.
Sounds,
Can we just have those dates again in April, please?
March 17, March 31, April 7, and April 14.
great, thank you. Any further discussion on future agenda items? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Oh,
Could I,
yes.
could I beg 2 minutes of the committee's time?
Yeah, if not in conflict with open meeting law, but There's this, you're
I'm
the
just-
parliamentarian.
Tonight I'm a man looking for an audience, and I just thank you, friends, for listening to me for a couple minutes. This morning I learned that Attorney Robert Parody died last night, and people that have conducted real estate business in town might remember him as Attorney Robert Parody, but most of us knew him as Bob Parody. And I would just like to honor the man by reporting that I came to town about 46 years ago, and 7 years ago, and got interested in the town and came and a couple of steps, got appointed to the Finance Committee. And at that time, Bob was chairman of the selectmen, had served on the Finance Committee, had been on the board for a few years, Bob and Barry. And the two of them welcomed this kid, I was like 27, Washershaw, into town, and really sort of mentored me into civic activity. And I don't know if I've done any good for town, but the town has done good for me. And I have enjoyed being, first growing my roots here and then feeding my roots, and made friends from that committee that I still have coffee with on a regular basis from 40 years ago. I hope that the town will remember Bob with great affection. And I hope that officials and appointed and elected officials will look to Bob's practice, especially in his early years. He struggled in the last years with his health, as a model for how to welcome new folks into town and into action in the town. And I thank him, and I thank you for listening.
Yeah, I didn't know he passed away. I'm sorry to hear that. He appointed most of us here. Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, or second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, unanimous. Thank you.